Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I post weekly reviews as well as retrospectives. This Thursday, I'll be dropping the next installment in my MCU retrospective series, The Incredible Hulk. So watch out for that. You can find the previous videos of that series in my MCU retrospective playlist on the channel. Saturday, I'll be dropping my review for Napoleon, so be on the lookout for that as well. Before we jump into it, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, and of course tell your friends if you already haven't. Any and all support greatly helps the channel, and I very much appreciate it. With that being said, let's dive into True Detective Night Country. I am of the firm opinion that the debut season of True Detective is the best single season of television that I've ever seen. I think it's almost perfect. I loved absolutely everything about that show. I've rewatched it a couple times since it premiered, and it still holds up today. Now, I know the seasons that followed were not as heavily revered, however, I still enjoyed them. I understand the complaints of season 2 fully. I still think that season is pretty damn good, especially the performances. And it's hard, I think, to not look at that season through the lens of the first, which is why I believe critics were so harsh on it. It has its faults, of course, but I by no means think it's terrible like many do. Season 3 was definitely a return to form for the series. It was praised by critics, fans seemed to enjoy it, I certainly did. But I didn't necessarily think it was as good as the praise it received. But again, it's being compared to Season 2, which was undoubtedly a low point for the series. All of this is to say that despite what the reviews say, I've always been a big fan of this series as a whole, and I've always been interested to see what Pizzolatto did with newer installments. Then he stepped away. After Pizzolatto's departure, I became skeptical of the idea of even continuing on this series. To me, he's just such a unique and intelligent voice in the television landscape that I didn't know if this series would be able to stand on its own without him. Now, after having watched all 6 episodes of Night Country, I'm disappointed to say that I'm still of that same mindset. I found some enjoyment out of this season, but there was a lot that I also just didn't care for. Overall, it was just a mixed bag that I honestly don't know if I would even care if they continued on this series or not. True Detective has always been a series that, at its core, is a character study of flawed protagonists and how they deal with mental, physical, and spiritual implications of investigating such heinous acts of violence. The cases are often so baffling and complex that they encompass months or even years of the protagonists' lives, putting a strain on their personalities, their relationships, and their entire life, in fact. There is also this theme that transcends the series as a whole, well, not so much Season 2, but definitely Season 1 and 3, and it's the concept of existential evil. If you draw back to Season 1, Rust Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey, is constantly delving into the metaphysical as it pertains to his case. He's of the mindset that there is and always will be a universal struggle between good and evil. And these factors are what make True Detective one of the more profound and thought-provoking shows on television. And Night Country attempts to repeat these themes, but without doing all of the legwork required to get there. First and foremost, I want to talk about the first aspect of this show that I think hinders it, and that is its runtime. This season is too short. The first 3 seasons of this series are all 8 episodes, and for a series that delves heavily into such heavy topics involving spirituality, philosophy, and the brutality of human nature, they sort of need to be that long. It takes a long time to flesh all of that out. And I think this is Night Country's first mistake right off the bat. They shaved this season down by 2 episodes. Now, Cutting off 2 hours doesn't seem very significant, but 2 hours is a hefty length of time that we as the audience are able to spend with these characters and understand them and their obstacles more deeply. It's 2 more hours of writers having ample time to completely pay off a story for a satisfying conclusion, an issue which hinders the latter half of this season a ton. The wrap-up of Night Country is very sudden, messy, and all around unfulfilling. I think if you're going to critique this season, then you have to establish a starting line where all of the pitfalls of this season cascade down from. And to me, it's the runtime. Building off of that, there is a severe lack of characterization this season. As I stated up top, this season attempts to do what the first 3 seasons did with their protagonists, without doing any of the hard work to get there. They try to craft these flawed, interesting characters without fleshing them out properly, leaving us with shells of what should be fascinating characters. Jodie Foster as Liz Danvers is set up as this hard-ass police chief who has suffered from great personal tragedy and who's been around the block and seen it all. Foster does fantastic with the material she's given, I will say that. The issue with this character is we never get any deep development. We know from mere glimpses that she was once happily married with a son. We know that her son and her husband were taken from her in a car accident, and in turn her life fell apart. That outline is good. In fact, it's similar to Rust Cole from Season 1. Because of the pain, she drinks a lot. She's brazen towards the show's other characters. The writers even allude to the fact that she, for the lack of a better phrase, fucks to forget. We see this come to play as she sleeps around with her married ex-supervisor Ted Conley, played by Christopher Eccleston. The issue is, all of this is just sort of vaguely portrayed. You never really see her hit rock bottom. Like Cole, her character is designed to be this woman who's lost everything and she's in constant agony to the point where the rest of her life falls at the wayside. In contrast to Cole, however, you don't really see this play out on screen. Danvers still has a relationship with her stepdaughter who she continues to raise and care for. It's bumpy, sure, but it's there. She drinks heavily, but you never see any real consequences come from that. And save for a few flashes here and there, you don't really ever see her break down over the loss. It never significantly interferes or even influences her work. Whereas with Cole, after losing his daughter, his whole life collapsed and spiraled out of control. He lost his marriage, he got addicted to drugs as well as his undercover work, he unlawfully executed a criminal he was working, and his whole outlook on life was altered because of that tragedy. With Danvers, the show attempts to do the same, but she always comes off as just unnecessarily mean and just downright unlikable. I think the writers did a slightly better job with Danvers' colleague, Trooper Evangeline Navarro, played by Callie Reyes. But her character still isn't as interesting as I feel she should be. The entire season she is shown dealing with the fallout of the death of her mother. She is constantly tending to her mentally ill sister, and she's haunted by a case that her and Danvers couldn't solve years prior. This character is more compelling because there are more interesting aspects of her design. She draws a lot from the supernatural side of Rust Cole's character. She believes that her family line is cursed and that she will eventually go insane and take her own life, as her sister does later in the season. The aspect of this character that deters me is the way that she deals with her trauma, and it is to drink, get in fights, and engage in a no-strings-attached relationship with bar owner Kavik. It's not a bad route to take the character, it's just kind of jarring that the writers would commit the same characteristics to both of our main characters. And they don't commit fully to either one of them. Now, despite all of that, I do think the writers did a more effective job at exploring the characterization of Navarro, but I cannot get past the fact that we basically have the same two characters being portrayed, and I don't think there's enough that differentiates these characters from one another. The other piece of these two characters and their relationship that doesn't quite work either is that I don't recall it ever being explained why these two characters fell out. It's shown that earlier in their career they responded to a call where a man had murdered his wife. Navarro, in anger, shoots and kills this man as it seemingly reminds her of the abuse her father used to inflict on her late mother. Danvers admits to her that she thought about doing the deed herself, and they agreed to cover it up as a murder-suicide. So what exactly drove the wedge between them? If they both agreed that this was the justified thing to do in their opinion, and that they would in turn conceal the actual facts, it doesn't really ever make sense why they've avoided each other for so long. It's alluded to that the unsolved nature of the murder of local Inuit woman Annie Kaltak is what caused the rift, but based on the facts laid out to us by the series and the writers, the issues between the two women had already started, and the Kaltak case just intensified the situation. So we're kind of left with a rushed resolution of their relationship, and it's never very clear what actually happened between them. Then there's Pete. Pete is a young father and protege of Danvers. His father, played by John Hawkes, Hank, is one of Danvers' colleagues that she, surprise, surprise, does not get along with. Pete is the one character that we actually see the current case have a vast effect on. He's very green when it comes to a case like this. You can tell when the team discovers the scientists from the Salah station, frozen, huddled together. He's disturbed by it. He's constantly at odds with his wife and Danvers over the commitment to the case because it continues to pull him away from his family. He's visibly exhausted every time he's on screen, as Danvers is clearly overworking him. He also gets faced with an impossible decision in the back half of the season when he encounters his father holding Danvers at gunpoint. Hank admits that he helped cover up Annie's murder years earlier and is attempting to derail Danvers and Navarro's investigation of the Salah incident. Pete, faced with this difficult choice, chooses to kill his own father and save Danvers and Navarro. His story is complex and compelling, and he's probably the best character in the show, but he's still not as rounded out as he should be. We're given hints throughout the season that he's been either physically or mentally abused by his father, but the writers never fully commit to that storyline either. So when he does kill his father, it's shocking, but also sort of strange, as you're left thinking, this guy just killed his dad, and nothing comes of it. He's shaken by it, sure, but at the end of the series, he doesn't seem tormented about it at all. It's a very odd way to resolve this storyline. While we're on the topic of Pete's father, Hank, don't expect too much out of this character. He's another character who, from the outside looking in, has flaws, but you never explore them fully, and you never know why he is the way he is. We spend so much time on a storyline about him meeting his mail-order bride, a storyline that doesn't matter in the slightest and could be cut completely out and not change the show at all. Instead, the writers should have spent more time exploring the background of his relationship with Pete and Danvers, and his character and the talent of John Hawkes is just wasted. The story this season, as I stated before, really never pans out. It's revealed in the back half of the show that this case of the frozen Salah workers is entwined with Annie Kaltak's murder from years earlier. This is a suspicion from the onset and further built upon throughout the show. It's revealed in the finale that Annie discovered that Salah and Silver Sky Oil were in collusion, as the scientists were faking the company's toxicity records because the continued pollution was making the scientists' work easier. Annie took it upon herself to destroy their work, and the scientists, angered by so much hard work gone to waste, kill her. Danvers and Navarro then discover that the cleaning ladies of the lab uncovered the hatch where the work was kept, and didn't think any real justice would occur if they reported it. So they, as a group, forced the scientists out on the ice at gunpoint to their deaths. This finale was so frustrating. I just want to digress for a moment. My single favorite aspect of this season was the return to the mysterious and occult-like elements. Like Season 1, the season leans heavily into the supernatural atmosphere. Setting this season in Alaska, especially in small-town Alaska that doesn't receive sunlight for a month, lends itself to this attribute. Many of the characters in this season believe that you can communicate with the dead, that there are supernatural forces at work around this isolated town, and I do enjoy that facet, as I did in Season 1. That being said, that portion of this season has absolutely no bearing on the finale whatsoever. Turns out the killer wasn't some religious zealot or deranged cult fanatic, as the show was building all along. It was a group of cleaning ladies who took it upon themselves to commit vigilante justice to avenge Annie's murder. And it's not very clear how they even discovered this secret about the scientists. Because they found the hatch where their work and equipment was kept? It didn't quite make sense how this group of women deduced that the scientists were responsible for Annie's murder. And in the end, it leaves the finale with more loose ends than it should, and it all feels very rushed. I had high hopes for this season after viewing the initial trailer. I was immediately excited, and admittedly, I had higher hopes after the first 2 episodes because this season does start off on a high note. And I just love the idea of a murder mystery taking place in a secluded Alaskan town. That setting just lends itself beautifully to this genre. I was also excited for the supernatural-esque aspect to make a welcome return. And while this show does utilize these attributes, it never sticks the landing with any of it. The whole season just feels unnecessarily rushed. The characters never get fleshed out to their full potential, and the finale and the resolution of the case leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. It's disheartening because I do think this season had great bones to it, and over the first 2 to 3 episodes, it's great, but the writers just didn't know how to bring it all together in a satisfying fashion. I don't like to be the one to put blame on any single entity for a fumbled final product, but I think it's clear this season was missing Nick Pizzolatto's influence. Maybe it's time for True Detective to make amends with its creator, or call it quits. Whatever they decide to do, I hope it's the former.